Long before roads were mapped, and long before the forests of Eastern Europe were carved back by towns and villages, people spoke quietly about what lived beyond the tree line. Deep in those forests, where the birch trees grow pale and the wind moves softly through the branches, there were places no traveler wished to wander after nightfall. The woods were old, older than the villages that stood at their edges, older even than the stories themselves. And somewhere in that wilderness, it was said there lived an old woman. Some called her a witch, others called her something far worse. Her house stood alone in a clearing, balanced upon the legs of a giant chicken, turning slowly as though it had a life of its own. A fence made of bones surrounded the hut, and upon each post rested a human skull whose empty eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The woman who lived there traveled through the forest in a wooden mortar, steering with a pestle and sweeping away her tracks with a broom so that no one could follow. Her name was Baba Yaga. To some, she was a devourer of children. To others, a strange guardian of ancient wisdom. She could destroy the foolish, but she could also help those who proved themselves worthy. In the old Slavic tales, Baba Yaga was never simply good or evil. She was something older than that, something that belonged to the forest itself. And among the many stories told about her, one has endured for centuries. It is the story of a young girl named Vasilisa, who was sent alone into the dark woods to seek fire from the witch. Tonight, we open the archive. Long ago, there lived a merchant and his wife. They had one child, a daughter named Vasilisa. By all accounts, she was a gentle and kind girl. But when Vasilisa was still very young, her mother became gravely ill. Knowing that her life was coming to an end, the woman called her daughter to her bedside. In her hand, she held a small wooden doll. She placed the doll in Vasilisa's hands and spoke softly. "My child," she said, "I am leaving this world, but I will not leave you without protection. Take this doll and keep it with you always. Never show it to anyone. And if you ever find yourself in trouble, feed the doll and ask it for guidance." Not long after, Vasilisa's mother passed away. And so, the girl grew up without the warmth of the one person who had loved her most. For a time, her father cared for her as best he could. But merchants often travel, and long journeys kept him away from home. Eventually, he remarried. At first, the woman he chose seemed kind enough, but she had 2 daughters of her own, and they quickly grew jealous of Vasilisa. No matter how hard they tried, they could not match her beauty or her gentle nature, and so resentment began to grow within the household. The stepmother and her daughters gave Vasilisa the hardest work they could find. She was sent outside in the heat of summer and in the cold of winter. She chopped wood, she carried water, she worked in the fields until the wind and sun burned her skin. They hoped the labor would make her weak and ugly, but something strange happened. The more they burdened her, the more radiant she seemed to become. For every night, when her tasks were finished, Vasilisa would take the small doll from her pocket. She would give it a little food, and quietly she would whisper her troubles. And each night, after the doll had eaten, it would help her. Sometimes it finished the tasks she could not complete. Sometimes it guided her through problems she could not solve. And sometimes it simply comforted her. Years passed, and as Vasilisa grew older, the hatred of her stepmother grew deeper. One day, while Vasilisa's father was away on business, the stepmother decided to move the family to a new home. The house stood on the edge of a vast birch forest, but this was no ordinary forest. It was a place the villagers avoided, for deep within its shadows lived Baba Yaga, the witch who was said to eat people as easily as others ate chicken. Every day, the stepmother found new ways to send Vasilisa into the woods, but somehow, the girl always returned safely. Her doll guided her, and so the stepmother began to devise a crueler plan. One night, while darkness settled around the house, the stepmother crept through the rooms and quietly extinguished every candle. When the house was completely dark, she spoke loudly. "How can we work without light?" she said. "Someone must go to Baba Yaga and ask her for fire." The older daughters refused, but Vasilisa had no choice. Her stepmother pushed her out the door and into the night. The forest stretched before her, silent and black. Her heart trembled with fear, but she reached into her pocket and fed her doll. "Do not be afraid," the doll told her. "Go to Baba Yaga and ask for light." And so Vasilisa began her journey into the woods. She walked through the forest all night. The trees stood tall and pale around her. And then, suddenly, a rider galloped past. His horse was white. His clothes were white. His face shone pale as the rising dawn. As he passed, the darkness of the forest softened. Day was coming. Later, another rider appeared. This one wore red. His horse was red. And as he rode by, the sun rose above the trees. The forest glowed with daylight. All day Vasilisa walked, until at last she reached a strange clearing. There stood the hut of Baba Yaga. It rested upon giant chicken legs. Around it stood a fence made entirely of human bones, and upon the posts sat skulls whose empty eye sockets glowed faintly in the twilight. As Vasilisa stood frozen with fear, another rider galloped past. His clothes were black, his horse was black, and he rode through the gate of bones. Night fell instantly upon the forest. The glowing skulls lit the clearing, and then the ground began to tremble. The trees groaned. A terrible sound echoed through the forest. Baba Yaga was coming. She flew through the air in a wooden mortar, pushing herself forward with a great pestle. Behind her, she swept away her tracks with a broom. She landed before the hut and sniffed the air. "I smell like human," she growled. Vasilisa stepped forward. "My stepmother sent me," she said. "She told me to ask you for fire." Baba Yaga narrowed her eyes. "Stay here," the witch said. "If you serve me well, I will give you light. But if you fail, I will cook you and eat you." Inside the hut, Baba Yaga devoured enormous amounts of food. Then she gave Vasilisa a list of tasks. Clean the yard, sweep the hut, wash the clothes, prepare the supper, and separate every grain of cooked corn from the spoiled. "If you fail," she said again, "I will eat you." Soon the witch fell asleep. Her long nose rattled against the roof as she snored. Vasilisa took out her doll and fed it. The doll reassured her. "Morning is wiser than evening," it said. And when morning came, all the work had been done. The doll had completed every impossible task. This happened again the next day, and again the doll helped Vasilisa. Baba Yaga grew suspicious. Finally, she asked the girl how she had managed to do such difficult work. Vasilisa answered honestly, "My mother's blessing helps me." At once, Baba Yaga's expression changed. "I will not keep anyone with a blessing in my house," she said, and she drove Vasilisa out the hut. But before she left, the witch placed a skull upon a stick and handed it to her. "Take this," Baba Yaga said. It will give you the light you asked for." Vasilisa carried the skull back through the forest. When she reached her home, she was about to throw it away, but the skull spoke. "You must keep me," it said. "Your stepmother and her daughters have need of me." So Vasilisa brought it into the house. The skull's eyes began to glow brighter. The light grew hotter and hotter. Her stepmother and stepsisters tried to hide, but the skull's burning gaze followed them everywhere. By morning, nothing remained of them but 3 small piles of ash. Vasilisa alone was unharmed. After this, Vasilisa left the house and traveled to a nearby town. There, she lived with a kind old woman. Using flax, Vasilisa spun thread so fine it was said to be as soft as hair. From it, she wove cloth so beautiful that no tailor dared to cut it. The cloth eventually reached the Tsar himself, and when he discovered that Vasilisa had woven it, he summoned her to the palace. The Tsar was captivated by her kindness and her beauty, and in time they were married, and Vasilisa lived the rest of her days in peace, always carrying the small doll her mother had given her. But Baba Yaga herself remains far more mysterious. She continues to appear throughout Slavic folktale in many different forms. Sometimes she devours travelers, sometimes she helps them. She lives deep in the forest, far from the safety of villages, a place where ordinary rules no longer apply. Some scholars believe she represents the ancient wilderness. Others see her as a guardian figure, someone who tests those who pass through her domain. Baba Yaga is not simply evil. She is something older than the stories themselves, a figure who stands between the world of people and the deeper, darker world beyond the trees. Even today, the forests of Eastern Europe stretch for miles beyond the last villages. And if you wandered too far into those woods, past the places where the paths disappear, you might imagine somewhere in the distance a hut standing on chicken legs, turning slowly, waiting, and somewhere nearby, an old woman listening to the wind between the trees. Her name is Baba Yaga, and her stories are far from finished.